I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, I'm looking again at that age-old question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And again, I will be saying, sure as hell wasn't the rooster. And there's also somewhere in my neighborhood a heavy metal, amateur, heavily amplified band practicing, and I think that's appropriate too. This time, we'll be looking at that chicken-egg question through Gnostic scriptures, because my title is John Lamb Lash and Sophia. John Lamb Lash is the author of Not in His Image, Gnostic Vision, Sacred Ecology, and the Future of Belief, which first came out nearly 20 years ago through Chelsea Green. Since 2018, he's run the Sophianic School of Arts and Sciences and is now designing a platform for the theory and practice of planetary Tantra, including the Terma of Gaia Awakening of 8888. Lash is a leading voice for Sophia as the living wisdom goddess, who inadvertently created this world and its first ruler as a mistake. She then corrected it through Adam. Lash's source for Sophia is the Gnostic scriptures found in Nag Hammadi, particularly the Apocrypha or Secret Book of John. Lash popularized the term archon to mean supernatural beings who resent humanity for being better than them and want it to fail. I'll start with some quotes from Not in His Image, in which I agree with Lash. I'll then give his story of Sophia in his own words. I'll follow with his call to action with the Kika war party. I'll then put the story of Sophia into context, historically with the earthly archons of Greece and the nomarchs of Egypt, geographically with what Nag Hammadi was in pre-archon Egypt, mythologically with the Egyptian gods of the archons, politically with the military battle to rule Egypt, and biblically with the comparison of migrations. I'll end by focusing on the Gnostic scriptures themselves. The word Gnostic means simply seeker of knowledge, and another of Lash's titles is the Seeker's Handbook. The word comes from ancient Greece, gignosko, which means to come to know or to learn. It's a process, not an accomplished state. It's become a catch-all category for non-biblical scriptures of the ancient Mediterranean world. The first to use that term for themselves are the Sethians, who wrote about Seth as both perfect deity and perfect human. Seth is also, in Egyptian mythology, the fratricidal sociopathic god who dismembers his brother Osiris in revenge for not being chosen as the consort of Isis. In his name, goddess cultures were destroyed and patriarchy began. Was the Sophia story written by the patri-archons to subjugate goddess and dominate women? Or was it secret knowledge passed on by a goddess culture to give a way out? That's the question I'll seek to answer here. Lashing the patriarchy. From Not in His Image, this is John Lash on patriarchy and Christianity. Christian religion defines morality by a belief system based on a master-slave relationship and rooted in resentment of the raw beauty and power of the life force. What kind of world results if the power to dominate and control others, inflicting enormous suffering in the process, is sanctioned by a divine being who can at the same time redeem that suffering and release the perpetrators and their victims from that world's evils? From its inception, patriarchy has relied on salvation narrative to underwrite its program of genocide, ecocide, sexual repression, child abuse, social domination, and spiritual control. This script works beautifully for the dominator agenda, because it was deliberately written for it. How can a story about love, forgiveness, and divine benevolence endorse the perpetration of evil? This seems impossible and against all reason, until we realize that the story is not what it appears to be. The salvation narrative of the Bible is a story of perpetration, conceived to support and legitimate the dominator agenda. I couldn't agree more. Fallen Goddess Scenario. The work of John Lash is presented in the videos of Hans Carlson and on his website, Sophia's Correction. In his bio, Carlson describes 3 mystical experiences he had over the course of many years. This led him to Scientology, where he spent 20 years. After leaving that, he spent another 10 to 15 years looking for something, which he found when he discovered the work of John Lamb Lash on Sophia. In the embedded video, in the Substack version, the Fallen Goddess Scenario is read in English by different female voices. Carlson suggests that for the most concise story of Sophia, we listen to an interview of John Lash by Lisa Harrison. Here is an excerpt from that transcript. Sophia was a young eon. Eons can actually be young or old. So some of the eons in the Pleromic company had done many experiments with all kinds of different creatures, and they'd seen it all come and go. But Sophia was fairly new at this. She was like, say, a young mother. You could make her as, 18 or 19, very young. And she started to, in a sense, withdraw from the rest of the eons in the Pleroma, from the rest of the gods, and to become deeply preoccupied in her own self about this creature and what was going to be the fate of it, because there had been 9 instances when the human plasma seeded itself in a planetary world. Well, there were going to be more, because there's plenty of plasma in the Orion Nebula. And as those filaments go out into space, they find hospitable environments, and another version of humanity pops up in another planetary system, you see. So she was really concerned, and she started to do what the materials say was called dreaming unilaterally. Now, to dream unilaterally means that she pulled herself away from the other eons in the galactic core, and she started thinking all about what she alone could do to remedy this situation. She took her responsibility. And she also became consumed and compelled with an enormous passion for this particular creature. Her empathy for the human creature was deep, so deep that it separated her in certain ways from the rest of the gods. She said to herself, I won't let this happen again, and I think it happens because they don't have quite the right conditions in these planetary systems. They can't sustain their power, and the feedback loops that they form with their environments are too hard for them to manage. So I think that I would like to see humanity emerge in a 3-body system. This is called the trimorphic protonoia. Trimorphic means 3 form. So she was dreaming or envisioning an ideal situation where the anthropic plasma could emerge. Then something really extraordinary happened, really extraordinary. There's a line in the Gospel of Philip from Nag Hammadi, which is perhaps the most sensational line in all of that material. And it says, the world system we inhabit came about by an anomaly. Now, scholars usually translate that last word, anomou, it's anomou in Greek, as mistake. But I think it is more properly translated as anomaly. So there was an anomaly in the cosmic order. This is incredible intel. Sophia didn't make a mistake, but she did something. She did something spectacular. She pictured the world that she would like to see humanity emerge in a world that would be ideally set up so that it would be able to manage its own capacities. She became so impassioned. The word is anthemesis, and the themesis means enthusiasm, deep, deep burning passion. She became so passionate about the next version of Anthropos, which we call Anthropos 10 in planetary Tantra, that her very longing to see that world to come about pulled her out of the galactic core, and she fell or descended into the limbs of the galaxy. What she did was she crossed a boundary. Normally, the eons remain within the boundaries of the galactic core. Normally, they do not go out in their pure form of torrential living luminosity, which is capable of intelligence and capable of feeling and capable of sentience. Normally, they do not go out into the area of the galactic limbs, where there is what we would call heavy matter, elementary particles, dust. Heavy matter doesn't exist in the galactic core. There is no mass in the galactic core. There is mass in the galactic limbs. She descended into the realm of mass, which is called in the Gnostic lingo the kanoma, meaning the realm of the deficiency. And this described in what I call the fallen goddess scenario, and it is the story of our planet. Kika War Party, and the heavy metal band is really coming into its own on this one. But what really lit Carlson up, in his words, was reading about Lash's Kika War Party. Here is the manifesto. The Kika War Party is a planetary strike force comprised of men and women volunteers who self-select into 17 bands. A common aim unites the warriors in the party to strike offensively against all variations of the evil and corrupt system that works against life, truth, freedom, beauty, sanity, and the spirit of mutual aid. To this end, Kika warriors are prepared to neutralize or eliminate the key agents who run the system at the executive levels, as well as their minions and accessories when necessary. In this way, the KWP intends to bring down the system and prevent its recovery once and for all. Its operation. Fueled by transpersonal rage and aimed by elucidated anger, warriors in the party pick their battles wisely and select their targets with extreme care. Those who inflict suffering, so often with impunity and no effective opposition, now stand in the sights of the Kika War Party, marked for elimination. The time for mere exposure of social evil, voicing objections to the perpetrators, demanding them to stop, is over. The moment to strike back and take down the enemies of life is here, right now. The KWP does not seek justice. It commands revenge and reparation. It does not merely defend life. It seeks the triumph of life, beauty, innocence, love, pleasure, genius. It does not compromise or bargain with perpetrators who inflict suffering, mayhem, and death. It does not demand rights. It claims responsibility to act on what is right. Above all, it does not forgive. Count on Kika warriors to be ruthless in eliminating those who orchestrate and implement the agendas of social evil. The solution. Violence has a bad name due to those who use it wrongly, selfishly, immorally, indeed insanely. The sickos and sadists who inflict it on others always insist that violence is not an acceptable response to their depredations. Religions assist hugely in this twisted plea for nonviolence because religions have been constructed by the perpetrators to favor their 3D system of division, deceit, and domination. The KWP adds to the peaceful solution its proper measure of violence, homeopathically dosed. This strategy may be called contra-violence, the use of intentional, targeted violence against those who rule by force and never concede their power voluntarily. The striking force applied by warriors in the party is moral, mental, psychological, material, and magical, including the lethal measure of force, death by a killing spell. Supernatural. The source of evil on earth is purely human, but the evil humans do offers a portal for off-planet predators, archons. Humans create their own demons so well they really don't need interference from other worlds. But due to a cosmic anomaly, archons are real enough. The battle for the human mind rages against both archons and fictive self-generated demons such as Lucifer and Satan. Seeing the difference is critical to Kika strategies. The role of the supernatural in defeating social evil and eliminating the enemies of life is absolutely central to the mission of the Kika War Party. The Arthurian legends recount a paramount manifestation of the supernatural, the Grail. Knights who undertook the mystical quest to attain the Grail were also warriors who protected its mystery. The theme of mystic warrior defines the visionary path of all members of the party. Other martial traditions are welcome to join, bringing their savvy and strategies to the battle line. The KWP protects the Grail and its company, witnesses to the luminous splendor of the wisdom goddess Sophia. Kalikas are fearless warriors of many lands and languages, supported and guided by the genuine powers of the supernatural. Intending love, war, and magic, the threefold Kika vow, they lead the human species from problem into solution. And then there's a YouTube that shows the Kika lethal strike, involving a clay tablet, cording, a rusty crooked nail, a fishing sinker made of lead, and a photo of the target. Take your time and enjoy the process, Lash admonishes. Is this not a masculine, warlike interpretation of goddess spirituality? Archons versus oligarchs. Lash interprets archons as off-planet predators who inhabit evil humans who offer them a portal. But ancient Greeks knew them as all too earthly rulers. As I write in the first chapter of How to Dismantle an Empire, ancient Athens was ruled by 9 archons, chosen by the Areopagus, made up of retired archons. Those eligible for office had to be of noble birth and wealth, as measured in weights of precious metal. A talent of silver, weighing 57 pounds, was equivalent to 9 man-years of skilled labor. There was no coinage of small quantities of metal, so ordinary debts were measured in labor or grain. A boundary marker, called a houros, indicated that the smallholder farmer was a hectomori, who owed a sixth of his farm's expected yield, often for protection or a loan. Failure to pay could result in enslavement of the debtor and his family. The majority of the population consisted of laborers with no land and slaves who owed neither land nor their own labor. The Areopagus was the hill of Ares, Greek god of the warlord Aryans. When indebted Greeks threatened to side with the landless, enslaved, colonized, and even women, Solon abolished the debts and created a way for wealthy landowners to rise in the hierarchy, which should be pronounced airarchy, since air was the original spelling of Aryan. The debt marker, Horus, corresponds to the patron god Horus of the first dynasty to dominate Upper and Lower Egypt, which has since been called unification. This dynasty came from Aeropolis, city of the Eros, Aryans. Do we need a supernatural origin for evil, or can it be explained by an airarchy, where men are given power over women in exchange for their obedience to the oligarchs, especially in violence, destruction, and deception? The mythologies of religion and even the languages themselves have been written by the Aryan rulers. According to linguists, the Nag Hammadi codices were originally composed in Greek, but written in Coptic on the papyrus found buried in a jar on the bank of the Nile. What was their location called in ancient times before the earthly archons? The archons of ancient Egypt. Nag Hammadi in pre-archic times was the spiritual center of Bat, which I represent as B-A-A-T for pronunciation and comparison to Baal. She was the goddess in bovine form, with inward-facing horns who saw in two directions, the earthly realm and the afterlife. Bat was the chief deity of the Nile region called Seshesh, and her temple is the mansion of the sistrum, named for the ankh-shaped musical instrument. Sesh means scribe. Bat was the deity of the city of scribes, who were priestesses, as were the astrologers of Mahit, goddess in lioness form, represented by the Sphinx before it was defaced with a pharaoh's head. A map that I have put in the Substack version by Jeff Dahl shows the area with names in hieroglyphs, pay attention to hieroglyphs, from dynastic Egypt from 3000 to 30 BCE. On this map, Bat, or Nag Hammadi, is in the 7th nome, which are the 22 divisions of the Upper Egypt and 20 of Lower Egypt. Each nome was ruled by a nomarch, the archon of the nome. The master baiters. To Egypt under the nomarchs, the word archon has an overarching, another archon word, political meaning, not mythological. This would be particularly true in Nag Hammadi, as the power center of Bat, the horned cow goddess, who connects this world and the divine. What did Seshesh become under the archons? In Greek, it became Diospolis Mikra, or the lesser city of Zeus under Ptolemy. However, both the names Jupiter and Zeus come from Dies Pater, the sky father of the Aryans. Diospolis is closer to the original as lesser city of Dies. So the goddess Bat became the lesser possession of the sky father Dies. In Arabic, it was shortened to Hu, H-U, from Hu Sekhem. What does this mean in the Archon mythology? From Wikipedia, Hu in ancient Egypt was the personification of a religious term, the creative utterance, and closely connected to Sia. Hu was deification of the first word, the word of creation, that Atom was said to have exclaimed upon ejaculating in his masturbatory act of creating the Ennead, the 9 gods. Hu is mentioned already in the Old Kingdom pyramid texts as companion of the deceased pharaoh. In the Middle Kingdom, all gods participated in Hu and Sia and were associated with Ptah, who created the universe by uttering the word of creation. Hu was rarely depicted visually, I wonder why. When Hu was depicted, it would be as an anthropomorphic deity. In the New Kingdom, both Hu and Sia, together with Heka, were members of the creative powers of Amun-Ra. So who is the come cry of Adam, who masturbates the world into existence? The feminine is Adam's hand, since the Egyptian word for hand is female. When the Torah starts, in the beginning was the word who? And who is Sia? Sia, the god, personifies the perceptive mind. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Sia was believed to have been created from blood that dripped from the phallus of Ra. In the Old Kingdom, Sia was often depicted on the right side of Ra, holding his sacred papyrus. In the New Kingdom, Sia is depicted in the solar bark in the underworld texts and tomb decorations, together with Hu, the creative utterance, and Heka, the god of magic. These gods were seen as special powers helping the creator, and although Heka had his own cult, Sia did not. So, all the gods participate in masturbation and a bleeding penis ritual. Is that circumcision? Let's look at what Heka is from Wikipedia. The name Heka is identical with the Egyptian word magic. This hieroglyphic spelling includes the symbol for the word Ka, the ancient Egyptian concept of the vital force. The Old Kingdom pyramid texts depict Heka as a supernatural energy that the gods possess. The cannibal pharaoh must devour other gods to gain this magical power. Eventually, Heka was elevated to a deity in his own right, and a cult devoted to him developed. Heka is said to have been created in the beginning of time by the creator Atum. According to the Egyptian cosmological belief, their world was created through Heka. Spell 648 of the coffin text reads, "His powers put fear into the gods who came into being after him. His myriad of spirits is within his mouth. It was Heka who came into being of himself, at seeing whom the gods rejoiced, and through the sweet savor of whom the gods live, who created the mountains and knit the firmament together." His mother was alternatively said to be a form of Hathor, which was formerly Bat, lion-headed Menhit, and the cow goddess Mahit Weret, before settling on Neith, a war and mother goddess. As Ogden Golet explains, Heka magic is many things, but above all, it has a close association with speech and the power of the word. In the realm of Egyptian magic, actions did not necessarily speak louder than words. They were often one and the same thing. Thought, deed, image, and power are theoretically united in the concept of Heka. One Heka cult. According to a biblical archaeology site, the cult of Heka, or Hekakasut, Hyksos, were a Semitic population that had migrated from Canaan into the northern Egyptian delta as a powerful ruling class. These people of Semitic Canaanite origin were known to the Egyptians as the Hyksos, a unique people known for their shepherding and multicolored garments. And while later propagandistic Egyptian texts, such as that of the 3rd century BCE Egyptian historian Manetho, accused them of violently taking the land, modern researchers now know that they became established within Egyptian territory peaceably. We might add, substituting stealthily. The article continues. If you study fake news from ancient Egypt, you would consider the Hyksos a band of nasty, marauding outsiders who invaded and then brutally ruled the Nile Delta until heroic kings expelled them, writes Egyptologist Danielle Candelora. Ultimately, the Hyksos were overthrown and eventually, according to Manetho, took their journey from Egypt through the wilderness, and they built a city in that country which is now called Judea, and that large enough to contain this large number of men, and called it Jerusalem, as quoted by the 1st century CE historian Josephus in Against Apion. The association of the Hyksos with the Israelites, therefore, is not uncommon. After all, depending on the chronology followed, this dynasty was established in Egypt within the very same decade as the biblical immigration of Jacob and his family, 1660s BCE. In a recent Jerusalem Post article, one Egyptologist was cited as dismissing the connection between the Hyksos and the Israelites. Remarkably, however, she admitted that the concept has been frozen in the Egyptian memory to the point that to this day, the average person in Egypt thinks the Hyksos were Jews and associates them with destruction and chaos. Heka is hexing, the cannibalizing pharaoh who turns words into the power to devour. This twisting of hex words into malicious spells is still what we're dealing with today. Seth speaks. The Hekakasut, or Hyksos, were non-Egyptians who came to rule over Lower Egypt from their capital, Avaris. In the mid-16th century BCE, they were expelled from Egypt by Moses I. Their eviction from Egypt matches the time when Greece was infiltrated by the Hellenes, a name similar to Heliopolis in Egypt. Yet still, by the mid-14th century BCE, the Amarna letters cite the Habaru, which is the first version of Hebrew, as the terrorist thugs putting Egyptian cities under siege for Abdi Ashirta, who may be Abraham. Seth is the name of the bloodthirsty and fratricidal god demanding sacrifice. Several Aryan rulers used versions of Seth in their name as pharaohs. They demanded tribute in precious metals and women. Seth should be pronounced Seeth, which is telling, along with the Hekakasut capital being called Avaris. Are the Sethian Gnostics, who wrote the story of Sophia, giving incredible intel, as Lash says? Are they rebels against the Hebrew Yahweh, or is this a different version of the same story? And most importantly, does this say anything empowering about women? Or is it still blaming Eve for the birth of all evil? Let's go to the Gnostic Apocryphal Book of John to find out. Sophia as Pandora. For a decade, I attended the Jesus Seminars, an international conference of Bible scholars. Translations and experts on the Gnostics were frequent presenters, and I knew some personally. I helped organize a retreat to go line by line comparing translations on the Gnostic Gospel of Philip. A shelf in my library holds nothing but translations and texts on the Gnostics, so the Gnostics and I go way back. For this analysis, I'm using Bentley Leighton's translation called the Gnostic Scriptures. In his preface, he writes, "These works shed great light on the theology, atmosphere, and literary traditions of ancient Christianity and Hellenistic Judaism. The Gnostic movement did not simply share in the culture to which early Christianity belonged. Gnostics, in fact, made up one of the earliest and most long-lived branches of the ancient Christian religion. A knowledge of Gnostic scripture is indispensable for anyone who hopes to understand the historical roots of Christian theology and belief. Moreover, the Gnostic myth grew up in an intimate dialogue, though often a hostile one, with Jewish learning of the Greek-speaking synagogue. Thus, the Gnostic scriptures cannot fail to increase, however obliquely, our knowledge of the foundations of classical Judaism. This requires for me some translation. The term I use for Judaism is Yahwism. The Hellenes were Greek-speaking non-Greeks who came to rule over Greece and Canaan. They link to Egypt. The Scythian Gnostic texts are dated no earlier than 10 CE based on an interpretation of that Nazarene as Jesus. However, Judas, founder of the Zealot Rebellion, was said by Josephus to have been called the Nazarene. The Apocrypha of John gives the creation story. First, there are 4 luminaries created in charge of an eternal realm, each with 3 eons. The 12 eons belong to the offspring of the self-originate. Sophia, or wisdom, is the last of the eons, belonging to the 4th realm of the afterthoughts. Then, the perfect human being, the first manifestation and true person, was named the Ger Adamus by the Virgin Spirit, and that being was established upon the first eternal eon, and the invisible gave to it an invincible intellectual faculty. Now, the footnote says that the prefix ger is actually hair. It's actually as in eros, or holy. So Adam with the big brain and invincible intellectual faculty is an Aryan, or eros. In the second eternal realm, before the second luminary, it establishes Adamus, son Seth. And in the third eternal realm, before the third luminary, the posterity of Seth was established, and also the souls of the holy, which is Eros, Aryan persons. And then the 4th realm has souls who were not acquainted with the fullness, and did not repent at once, but rather held out for a while and then repented. So keep in mind that the Adamus had Seth and Seth's posterity without a woman in sight, and all was fine in the eternal realms. They were all Eros heroes. And then the woman tried it, and all Heliopolis broke loose. It continues. Now the wisdom, Sophia, belonging to an afterthought, which is an eon, thought a thought derived from herself. She wanted to show forth within herself an image, without the Spirit's will, and her consort did not consent. And she wished to do so without his pondering. For the person of her maleness did not join in the consent, for she had not discovered that being which was in harmony with her. Rather she pondered without the will of the Spirit, and without acquaintance with that being which was in harmony with her. And she brought forth, growing strong because of the vulgar element within her. So the woman thinks a thought for herself, and she brings forth a serpentine with a lion's face and with its eyes gleaming like flashes of lightning. Note that the serpent and the lioness are both aspects of goddess. This dim ruler, having darkness mixed with light, was named Yaldabaoth, and it, stupefied in its madness, made for itself other eternal realms. It named 12 authorities, including Cain, whom the races of humankind call the sun, and Abel, and then the 12th, who presides over the depths of Hades. Blame it on the mother. Sophia sees the abomination of having conceived without a consort's consent, and repents with much weeping. The Eros, Holy Spirit, takes pity and puts her in a 9th heaven until she rectifies her lack. Then the dim ruler, Yaldabaoth, whose dark skin sullies the light skin of the Eros, got all his 7 authorities together to make a human being that would be a light for them. 74 angels made everything down to the toenails. 7 more are put in charge of the proceeding. 20 supply the functioning, including 1 for the right nipple and 1 for the left, 1 for the toes of the right and 1 for the left, but all the private parts assigned to 1. 7 are ordained in charge of those, with 5 more named for perception and impulse to action. All this for a single man. Then we get to the demons of the body: heat, cold, wetness, dryness, and the mother of them all is matter. She is also the mother of the demons: pleasure, desire, grief, fear, and passions. From these come envy, fanaticism, pain, contention for victory, anxiety, vain boasting, wrath, bitter lust, insatiableness, terror, anguish, shame. They called their collaboration Adam, and then belatedly realized he was better than them, so they threw him into the darkness. Out of pity, the Eros make him a mate, but Yaldabaoth sees the woman preparing for her male, who is master over her, and the first ruler saw the female virgin standing with Adam, and saw that the living luminous afterthought had been shown forth within her. And Yaldabaoth became filled with lack of acquaintance. And that may be my favorite line in this whole secret book of John. So of course he rapes her and begot on her 2 sons. These are Elohim with the face of a bear, and Iau with the face of a cat, the just and the unjust, who are Cain and Abel, with trickery in mind. And with that trickery, it never says which one is which, but since an I equals a Y and a U equals a W, Iau would be pronounced Yahweh. So now Yaldabaoth has originated sexual intercourse, and in the female who belonged to Adam, it sowed the seed of desire, and it supplied them some of its counterfeit spirit. Yep, it's those women and their desires that fuck everything up. Right, ladies? Fortunately, Seth comes in to save the day, hero that he is. He raised up the posterity of the perfect race, raised their thinking, and raised up the eternal light of the human being. Meanwhile, Yaldabaoth and his authorities took turns fornicating with wisdom, and by them destiny was begotten as bitterness. Does wisdom have anything to say about this? Secret John continues, and they married women and begot children out of the darkness, hardened with the hardness of the counterfeit spirit, down to the present time. Don't need a hero. In light of the evidence, another Arian conceit. This Sethian Gnostic scripture is more Arian nonsense, asserting the superiority of the light-skinned northern archons over the dim and dark-skinned indigenous people. And the story of Sophia is grasping at straws to say it empowers women. It's exactly the opposite. For women to have ownership of their bodies and their children is to create a monster. They let one woman into heaven and she fucks it all up. Only a man, or 200 generations of them, could see this as giving women a fair shake. In conclusion, the archons are mere human psychopaths, using a technique honed over 5,000 years, the right of rape and sex slaves in return for men's obedience in using violence. They are the original motherfuckers, and that's a term I use technically. May they be filled with lack of acquaintance. For more on the connections between the Egyptian mythology and the Bible, here is Hebrews in Egypt, Slaves or Masters. And this is Maga, the crocodile demon. And at the Substack, I also have linked the Master Baiters and also Genesis, the Naked Deception. Thank you for watching.